On the evening of December 25, 1996, an 8-year-old beauty pageant winner named JonBenét Ramsey spent Christmas at home in Boulder, Colorado. She was part of the Ramsey family, her parents, brother, a household living in a spacious home in a quiet neighborhood. The family celebrated the holiday with friends and had dinner. JonBenét at one point appeared to fall asleep upstairs. Early the next morning, her mother, Patsy, found a ransom note on the staircase landing. It was typewritten and demanded a large sum of money, a figure around 118,000 USD, purporting to be for JonBenét's safe return. The note instructed the family not to contact the police and gave a time frame, vague but urgent. This note instantly transformed a holiday morning into a crime scene. Later that morning, when the family discovered JonBenét missing from her bedroom, a search began inside the home, culminating in the discovery of JonBenét in the basement, where she had been found unconscious. Despite emergency response, she did not regain consciousness. The local law enforcement agencies were called, evidence was collected, and a formal investigation was launched. The case quickly became high profile. Because the victim was a child, was well known for pageants, the family was prominent, and the ransom note offered an unusual dimension. Key questions arose almost immediately. Why was the ransom note written the way it was? So long, so detailed, and yet not followed precisely by whoever left it. Why was the sum requested suspiciously close to Patsy Ramsey's bonus that year, according to some financial records? Why was the note written on paper taken from inside the home, in fact from a notepad in the schoolroom closet? Those details sobered investigators. This was not a typical outside abduction scenario. The fact that the note instructed no police contact, yet the police were promptly involved, added another layer of oddity. During the early hours of the investigation, law enforcement officials treated the residence as an active scene. Detectives ground through interviews, physical evidence, and timelines. The basement area where JonBenét was found, the staging area of the ransom note, and the bedroom upstairs all gained focus. Family members and their friends were interviewed at length. Some areas of the house were sealed for days. For the public, the image of the Ramsey home behind yellow tape became emblematic of the case. Over time, several investigators and journalists pointed to the possibility that the case was not strictly a straightforward outside intruder scenario. Was it a kidnapping turned tragic? Or was it something different, complicated by timing, relationships, and odd coincidences? Among the many published observations, the note was written on a pad removed from the house. The handwriting of other items at the scene showed irregularities, and the body's location in the basement, not outside or in transit, raised questions about what had actually happened within the house. At the same time, the family's shock and plea for help were genuine. No public evidence in reliable records suggests that any of the family members voluntarily withheld cooperation. Media coverage escalated rapidly, and the case seemed tailor-made for television and print. A beautiful child, a ransom note, a wealthy family, secrecy and confusion. The public fascination surged, and the case became a national sensation. For true crime enthusiasts and armchair sleuths alike, the story invited speculation. Who wrote the note? What unseen evidence remained in the basement? Why did investigators treat the scene the way they did? Within this environment of high attention, every detail, every word in the ransom note, every gesture in the house was scrutinized. In our discussion today, as we consider the case, it's crucial to pause and reflect. The facts we rely on are drawn from public records, investigative reports, and credible media accounts. We are not making accusations. We are reviewing a complex situation involving a young girl, a grieving family, law enforcement, and unanswered questions. Our aim is clarity, not judgment, gathering context, not concluding definitively. Mistakes were made, paths were taken, time has moved on, but the questions remain. As we move forward in the next segment, we'll trace the timeline of that late December night, from meals to slumber, from the discovery of the note to the discovery of JonBenét, and examine how each step added to the mystery. We'll also look at key physical evidence and how it was handled. Stay with us. As the first hours of December 26, 1996 unfolded, the Ramsey residence transformed from a family home into a hive of uncertainty. Detectives arrived, neighbors gathered, and the morning air filled with tension. Patsy Ramsey was visibly distraught. John Ramsey, the father, looked composed but strained, the kind of calm that hides panic. Officers began photographing and fingerprinting, but the handling of the scene was far from perfect. In hindsight, investigators and analysts would later agree that critical errors were made in those initial hours. Too many people moved through the house, too much potential evidence was touched, shifted, or lost. According to reports from those present, officers instructed John Ramsey to search the home again around midday. This, many now believe, was a turning point. When John descended to the basement, a section partially unfinished, colder than the rest of the house, he discovered his daughter. The shock that followed was indescribable. Law enforcement scrambled. The medical examiner was called, yet in that single hour, crucial opportunities to preserve evidence had already slipped away. For detectives, the contradictions started stacking up. The ransom note's language didn't align with a typical abduction. It referenced foreign factions, but contained phrasing that sounded distinctly American. It included unusual wording like, "We are a group of individuals," inconsistent with known ransom communications. Even the note's length, over 2 pages, was atypical. The more investigators studied it, the more it seemed as if the author had time, privacy, and an intimate familiarity with the house. Forensic analysis on the note became one of the first technical battlegrounds of the investigation. Handwriting experts were brought in. Patsy Ramsey voluntarily provided samples. The results were inconclusive. Some experts said the similarities were worth noting. Others said they weren't sufficient for any claim. That pattern, of conflicting opinions and no closure, would become a hallmark of the entire case. Meanwhile, the Boulder Police Department faced growing pressure. Media trucks lined the street. Reporters camped outside, eager for statements. When the case became public knowledge within days, speculation ignited. Early coverage leaned heavily on family suspicion, partly because of the ransom note's origin inside the home and partly because the neighborhood showed no clear signs of forced entry. Yet the Ramseys denied any involvement. They insisted someone had broken in and that they were being unfairly blamed. One detail investigators wrestled with was the basement window. A small grate and window well provided possible access, though opinions were divided on whether anyone could have entered that way. The Ramseys mentioned a previous incident of broken glass there, something John Ramsey himself had reportedly caused months earlier, which only deepened confusion. Could an intruder have used that route? If so, why were there no clear footprints in the snow outside? And why would an intruder take the time to write a long ransom note on a pad from inside the house? By January, the Boulder Police Department had established 2 main theories. 1, an intruder, someone with knowledge of the Ramseys' habits, had entered the house, committed the act, and left behind the note to mislead investigators. 2, that the events unfolded internally, perhaps accidentally, and were then staged to look like a kidnapping. Neither theory was proven. Both divided the investigation team. As months passed, the Ramseys hired private investigators and public relations advisors, something that raised eyebrows at the time. But in their view, it was necessary. They felt besieged by the press and mistrusted by local authorities. Their televised interviews reflected that conflict, sir. The appearance of cooperation mixed with defensiveness. They wanted the world to see their pain, but also to defend their reputation. That combination often backfired. To the public, it looked like strategy, not grief. Evidence collection continued. DNA samples, fibers, footprints, handwriting. Laboratories combed through the smallest trace. Early tests revealed unidentified DNA on JonBenét's clothing, which didn't match any family member, so that finding became a cornerstone for those who argued in favor of the intruder theory. If the DNA belonged to an outsider, that would change everything. Yet others argued it could be from secondary transfer, microscopic contamination from manufacturing or handling. Nothing was absolute. Throughout 1997, law enforcement and the district attorney's office occasionally clashed. Detectives wanted to treat the Ramseys as key subjects. Prosecutors urged caution. The stalemate frustrated both sides. Meanwhile, new leads appeared, then vanished. Anonymous tips came in by the hundreds. Letters arrived from supposed witnesses, self-proclaimed psychics, and conspiracy theorists. Every claim had to be checked, every rumor recorded. Public fascination only grew. Television specials, magazine covers, and nightly broadcasts dissected every new finding. The case became more than an investigation. It became an American obsession. People debated handwriting comparisons like sports scores. They examined floor plans, ransom note transcripts, and statements line by line. In that environment, facts and assumptions often blurred. The Ramseys eventually participated in a widely viewed TV interview in 1997, hoping to clear the air. But instead, it only deepened the divide. To some, they seemed genuine and grieving. To others, their answers felt rehearsed. That perception gap between what the audience saw and what the investigators believed widened the case into a cultural phenomenon. Even years later, seasoned detectives would say the JonBenét case was one of the most compromised scenes they'd ever encountered. The early mishandling meant no theory could ever rest on airtight evidence. From that point forward, the investigation would be built on partial facts, interpretations, and probability. In the next section, we'll explore how this fractured foundation led to years of false starts, including public suspects, confessions that went nowhere, and the eventual shift in focus toward the DNA evidence that continues to shape the debate today. By 1998, the case had reached a crossroads. The Boulder Police Department had exhausted much of its investigative energy, and the public's patience was wearing thin. People wanted answers, but every path forward seemed to end in confusion. Then came the grand jury, a process meant to quietly assess evidence, weigh potential charges, and decide whether anyone could be formally indicted. For months, the jury heard testimony behind closed doors. Witnesses came and went through side entrances to avoid reporters. The Ramseys were not charged, nor were they officially cleared. But later, it was revealed that the jury had actually voted to indict both parents on charges related to the case. The district attorney at the time, Alex Hunter, chose not to sign the indictment, citing insufficient evidence for conviction. It was an extraordinary decision, one that still divides opinions decades later. That moment solidified what many observers had suspected. The evidence was fragmented. Physical proof pointed in multiple directions, and interpretation varied depending on who examined it. Some experts insisted the DNA evidence supported the intruder theory, while others maintained that no stranger could have written such a specific ransom note or navigated the house undetected. The DNA evidence became the heartbeat of the case for years to come. Collected from the clothing, it was a partial male profile, meaning it didn't provide a complete genetic fingerprint. As DNA technology advanced, analysts hoped for breakthroughs, but the results remained inconclusive. In the early 2000s, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and later private labs retested the evidence with newer methods. The same unknown profile appeared, and that consistency added weight to the idea that someone outside the household might have been involved. Still, skeptics argued that the presence of unidentified DNA was not proof of guilt or innocence. Clothing, especially children's garments, often carry trace amounts of DNA from manufacturing or handling. It became a debate between science and circumstance, a debate that never truly ended. While science progressed, public fascination deepened. The media landscape changed dramatically with the rise of the internet, and the Ramsey case became one of the first major crimes dissected online. Internet forums sprang up where amateur sleuths shared theories, analyzed photos, and debated possibilities. Some participants combed through public records and interview transcripts. Others speculated about psychological motives or parsed single words from press conferences as if they were codes. Over time, those online discussions began influencing mainstream coverage. Television networks revisited the story year after year, each time promising new revelations. Documentaries reconstructed the scene. Experts on talk shows debated handwriting and fiber analysis. And through it all, one fact remained constant. There was still no definitive answer. In 2006, the case took an unexpected turn when a former schoolteacher named John Mark Carr confessed to being involved. He was arrested overseas and flown to the United States under heavy media attention. For a brief moment, the world thought the mystery might finally be solved. But the relief was short-lived. DNA testing quickly ruled him out. He had never been in Boulder at the time of the incident. His confession, as it turned out, was based on fantasy and false detail. The episode embarrassed law enforcement and reopened old wounds for the Ramsey family, who had endured a decade of suspicion. It also reminded the public how much misinformation had surrounded the case from the beginning. Anyone could claim to know the truth, and without closure, people were willing to listen. By that time, the surviving family members had long since moved away from Boulder. Patsy Ramsey passed away in 2006 after battling illness, having never seen the case resolved. John Ramsey, her husband, remained vocal in his call for continued investigation. Their son, Burke, grew up away from the spotlight but would later appear in interviews as an adult, still insisting on his family's innocence. When DNA advances reached a new stage in 2008, then District Attorney Mary Lacey publicly apologized to the Ramsey family and officially cleared them of suspicion, citing the unidentified DNA profile as key evidence. She said it was consistent with a male outside the family, and concluded that they were not responsible. Many viewed that as vindication. Others, especially veteran detectives from the early investigation, disagreed. They argued that while the DNA was real, it did not conclusively prove an outsider's involvement. It only showed that someone else's genetic material was present. The disagreement reflected something larger, a philosophical divide about how to interpret uncertainty. Forensic evidence had given investigators clues but not conclusions. In the absence of definitive proof, people leaned toward whichever narrative made the most sense to them, either that an intruder had somehow entered a secure home unnoticed, or that something within the household had gone terribly wrong and was misrepresented in panic. For true crime enthusiasts and analysts alike, this case became a blueprint for how complex investigations can fracture under pressure. It showed what happens when media intensity, emotional tragedy, and investigative error collide. It also revealed how evolving science can change the direction of a story years after the fact. The most telling part of this case, however, may not lie in the evidence but in what it revealed about the human desire for answers. People need closure. They want neat endings, justice delivered, and mysteries solved. But real life rarely provides that. The Ramsey case sits in that uneasy middle ground. Too much evidence to dismiss, too little to convict. As time marched on, new generations of online investigators continued to re-examine the files. They studied police interviews, autopsy reports, ransom note analysis, and family statements. The case spawned documentaries, podcasts, and even AI-based reconstructions of the crime scene. Yet every retelling ended in the same place: questions. In the next and final drop, we'll discuss how the case evolved in the 2010s and beyond, how new forensic methods and renewed media attention reopened the public's fascination, how surviving family members have lived with the scrutiny, and why, even decades later, JonBenét Ramsey's story continues to stand as one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in American history. As the 2010s arrived, the JonBenét Ramsey case entered its third decade, a time when technology began catching up to the evidence. New DNA extraction methods, once unthinkable in the 1990s, promised deeper answers. Investigators revisited archived samples with modern lab tools. The hope was that advanced genealogy tracking, the same technique that later identified suspects in other cold cases, could finally match that mysterious male DNA. But the results were still elusive. The sample, though consistent, was too limited to produce a definitive genealogical match. Scientists cautioned that the partial DNA profile might never lead to a name. Still, each time the evidence was re-examined, the story resurfaced. Documentaries aired on anniversaries. News outlets reprinted the ransom note in full, inviting fresh analysis. True crime communities online debated with renewed passion, their posts reading like modern-day detective journals. They pointed out new nuances in tone and phrasing, examining whether the note was written in a rush or deliberately constructed to sound frantic. The case had evolved beyond police reports. It became a mirror of how Americans approach mystery itself. By this time, the surviving members of the Ramsey family had endured decades of speculation. Burke Ramsey, JonBenét's older brother, gave a televised interview as an adult in 2016. Calm and articulate, he addressed years of rumor head-on, saying his family had suffered more from public opinion than from the investigation itself. Watching him speak, many viewers realized how long this case had lasted. A boy who was 9 years old at the time was now a grown man defending his family's name. The tragedy had stretched across generations. Around the same time, CBS aired a documentary-style program that featured experts and investigators proposing their own reconstruction of events. It reignited debate across the country. The show implied conclusions that drew criticism and even legal action. The Ramsey family filed a defamation lawsuit against the network and several contributors, arguing that the program crossed the line between analysis and accusation. The case was later settled privately. That episode underscored something that had always hovered over the JonBenét case: the tension between seeking truth and respecting boundaries. In Boulder, the official investigation never closed. Cold case units continued to hold evidence, periodically reviewing it as technology improved. Officials have stated repeatedly that the case remains active. The district attorney's office and local police say they still receive tips, even decades later, from around the world. Some are outlandish, others seem plausible for a moment, then collapse under scrutiny. But every so often, a lead reopens a door long thought shut. Over the years, the focus of public discussion shifted from who did it to how did this investigation go so wrong. Analysts revisited the early procedural errors, the unsecured crime scene, The multiple people allowed to move through the house, the lack of immediate isolation of evidence. They compared it to modern standards of forensic protocol and saw a case study in what not to do. In that sense, JonBenét's case indirectly reshaped police procedure across the United States. Departments learned from Boulder's mistakes, but training manuals began to include examples drawn from that morning in 1996, emphasizing how one misplaced object or unsealed room can derail justice forever. For historians and older generations who lived through it, the case remains deeply etched in memory. They remember the media frenzy, the flashing cameras, the speculation on morning shows, the late-night commentators calling it America's Mystery Child. For them, it wasn't just a true crime story. It was the moment when private tragedy became national entertainment. Before social media, before constant online commentary, this case showed how television could turn grief into a spectacle. True crime enthusiasts today often revisit the JonBenét case as the genesis of the modern era of forensic fascination, a point when everyday people began to think like detectives, armed with documentaries, internet archives, and theories. It inspired thousands of amateurs to study cold cases, to scrutinize details, and ask questions once reserved for professionals. In many ways, JonBenét's story changed how the public interacts with criminal investigation itself. And yet, through all the analysis and theories, what endures is the human side. The memory of a young girl whose name has become larger than her life. Amid all the headlines, it's easy to forget that this began as a family's Christmas morning, one that turned to heartbreak. Behind every diagram, every lab test, every late-night discussion thread, there's still that one truth: a family never got closure and a community never got answers. It's been nearly 3 decades since that morning in Boulder. The house on 15th Street still stands, but its facade has changed. New owners, new paint, new memories. And yet, to anyone who knows the story, the name JonBenét brings that place instantly to mind, a reminder of a question that time still hasn't answered. When people talk about the case today, they don't always talk about guilt or innocence. They talk about lessons, about evidence handling, about media responsibility, about empathy. They talk about how easy it is for truth to get buried under public noise and how hard it is to separate facts from feelings once a story captures the nation's imagination. In the end, the JonBenét Ramsey case stands as more than a mystery. It's a reflection of human nature, our obsession with answers, our hunger for justice, and our struggle with uncertainty. Whether it was a break-in gone wrong, a staged misdirection, or something entirely different, the real story might remain locked in the silence of that Colorado basement. But maybe that's why it still fascinates us, because sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't about finding who's guilty. They're about understanding how a single moment can ripple across time, changing how we see innocence, truth, and the cost of not knowing. And perhaps, for those who remember that winter morning, the real secret the world tried to sense isn't hidden in evidence at all. It's hidden in how we choose to remember. Not the speculation, not the scandal, but the little girl whose name will forever stand for a question that no one could answer.
I didn't hear something correctly. Or maybe I did. I thought I heard that the grand jury in 1999, Boulder County grand jury in 1999, voted to indict John and Patsy on these charges. I'm not going to say this on YouTube, but on these charges. And the DA, Alex Hunter, at the time, reviewed the evidence. He reviewed the evidence and refused to sign the indictment. Okay, so I'm reading here. It says basically, I'm guessing he thought the evidence wasn't strong enough to secure a conviction. It has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. And the decision for him to do that wasn't made public until 2013. I'm sorry, but that's just crazy to me. Like, what evidence are we looking at, or are we not seeing? I mean, well, I guess it was back in 1999. So some of the things that we have today, we didn't have back then. And I know over the years, it's been people trying to basically, so many words, use different methods. It's the same thing that they do with serial killers, right? Where they go back and they try to figure out through DNA evidence or a new method of figuring out and connecting crimes, who did what. I don't know, man. I just feel like that's weird to me. Okay, so I have like a couple of points of discussion here, and I thought they were interesting. So I was looking at the meaning of reasonable doubt, quote unquote, and looking at the DA's refusal, which I feel like highlights the gap between probable cause, like what's needed for an indictment, and proof beyond a reasonable doubt, like what's needed for conviction. So you're looking at many observers, me included, that felt like Hunter made the cautious professional choice. And I would say, and this is just my opinion now, it's my opinion, it looks like he might have been protecting the Ramseys. I could be wrong. I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes, but, you know, maybe that's what they were doing. Maybe. Then you have like the political and community pressure. So Boulder's law enforcement community was divided here. Some detectives wanted immediate charges. Others feared the case was too weak and could backfire. Okay, once again, the DA's office was under enormous public pressure. Some are saying that Hunter avoided the trial to prevent a media circus that could collapse the case entirely. I just wonder if, even if that's what you're thinking, right? And this is all like for legal purposes, you know, just speculation and opinion. But I just wonder if, you know, you're saying the media circus could collapse the case entirely. What specifically about the case is going to collapse? I mean, we could talk about O.J. Simpson, but then what specifically, I mean, the glove, it was the glove that had him acquitted, right? If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. Johnny Cochran, right? But here, are we saying that there's a glove that if you were to take it to trial and put it on TV and the whole case hinged on one thing? Is that what we're saying here? I just wonder that, okay? Then you have the grand jury secrecy factor, okay? Because grand jury deliberations are sealed, the public didn't even know they voted to indict until 14 years later, which is crazy to me. You know, I understand sealing court records and things of that nature, but I think it's just a decision for me, for them to, all that time passed, all of it passed, and now we're just finding out that they decided, no, we're not gonna press the issue on this, okay? And so that revelation changed how people view the case. Suddenly the Ramseys were not just not charged, they were almost charged, okay? True. So it looks like now, knowing this information, they were charged, or excuse me, they, sometimes when you don't know the information, it almost seems like it's like a black and white sort of thing, right? But now we know they were almost charged, and that the jury, which I think could be telling, I think the grand jury said, hey, we think you should look a little bit more into these people. It went to the DA, and the DA said, no, I don't think we should. I don't think we have enough. I wonder if, and maybe they did, could there have been an outside agency, like an independent, well, I mean, I guess the people would have had to pay for that. And unfortunately, if it's not your child, they're probably not going to pay for it, right? But if you could have hired an outside independent, it's not a private investigator. Well, maybe it would be private investigator to kind of look at this stuff and see if you can find some charges, excuse me, on this and say, yeah, we definitely have enough to take this to trial. Okay. So next point, how media perception warped the story. Okay. So if you're looking in the late 90s, many assumed the grand jury had found no reason to indict. When the truth came out, people felt misled, fueling conspiracy theories that the DA was covering up for a wealthy family. I don't know. Is it a conspiracy theory? Okay. But legally, the DA's action was within his rights. Okay. So I know. How can I say this? We know the DA's actions were within his rights. We know that. That's not a point of contention. The point of contention, like you could be driving, say for instance, you could be driving and you stop at a red light. You're waiting for people to go. For their light is green. You're stopped at the red light. Your light turns green. The other people that were going, their light is yellow and it turns red. Now, you have the right because your light is green to go. You have that right. But if you see an 18-wheeler running and he's clearly going to run through that light, are you going to take that right? Or are you going to use better judgment and say, he's going to run that red light. I'm going to allow him to run that red light and I'm going to live. I'm going to make the smart decision. I know I can do this and I can be right about it and I can look a certain way in public, but I won't be here to argue that because the 18-wheeler would have taken me out, unfortunately. And it's very grim to think about that, but it is what it is. So I think that I'll just let them go. I'll just let him go as the 18-wheeler and do the smart thing. I feel like maybe there were some other things that if the grand jury is saying we have enough, I think we should look into this more. Maybe, in my opinion here, I'm not an expert, but maybe the DA could have looked at something more. Like I said, is there a way that we could have hired an outside contract independent worker or something like that to say, yeah, I've got experience in these types of cases. I'm willing to help. I know they probably hired a lot of other people. This was national news. We know that, right? But I don't know. It just felt like he gave up, I guess. But okay, so moving on, lessons in prosecutorial discretion. Okay, this case became a textbook example in law schools, right? Prosecutors must weigh evidence, not emotion. Fair. It said a failed prosecution could have made it impossible to ever retry the case. Yes, I agree with that in general, but here we are still looking for answers, right? And these people are scot-free. Okay, so the power of hindsight. That's my next point. Decades later, people still argue about whether Hunter's choice delayed justice or preserved it. Exactly what I was trying to get to. Okay, it shows how law, media, and public opinion can clash, even when everyone claims to be seeking truth. Well, obviously, we know that some of these people aren't seeking any truth. They're seeking, I don't know what they're seeking, but God help them, whatever it is that they're seeking, okay? Takeaway. Should prosecutors move forward when a grand jury indicts, even if they personally doubt the case? I think it goes back to the argument of if he was well within his rights, which obviously he was. I just think, once again, because the other part to that is it better to wait until the evidence is airtight, even if that means the case may never be solved? Well, I mean, once again, like I was saying, what does airtight look like? I mean, we're talking about, say, for instance, Diddy, like P. Diddy, Sean Puffy Combs, and how I think people were saying, if the feds come after you, it's over with. It's done. You've done it. They've just been waiting on you to basically bury yourself in your own grave. Basically, you're digging your own grave, right? That's just what they're waiting on. And I feel like I don't know if this is that. I don't know if this is the same thing. I don't, like I said, I feel like there could have been some outside, this somebody to come in and help. Like if you're overwhelmed, I feel like sometimes police departments overwhelmed, they're trying to solve the case and they want to do it. They might bring in a few people here to help. But when we're trying to solve things like this, I mean, why not try to get together with people who can possibly help? I mean, I get too many cooks in the kitchen, but this is important. We need to solve this thing. So yeah, I feel like, maybe this is Monday morning armchair quarterbacking, but I feel like there could have been a little bit more. I would have liked them to look more into it, I guess. But yeah, what do you think? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you disagree with me.